welcome to Comic Boom, the comics and education podcast. If you're interested in hearing more about the crossover between comics and education, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Lucy Starbuck-Bradley, and each week I'll be joined by a fellow educator, a librarian, an academic or a creator of comics to discuss their journey into comics and provide some inspiration to influence your practice, and hopefully shine some light on some titles you can bring into your libraries, classrooms and your bookshelves at home too. This episode of Comic Boom is sponsored by ALCS, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. And today, I can hardly contain my excitement. We celebrate 50 episodes of Comic Boom, and I am joined by the one, the only, Jamie Smart. I'm sure you all know Jamie's characters and the colourful worlds they inhabit. His comics have delighted children for decades, in the pages of national institutions such as the Dandy, the Beano, DFC and The Phoenix. His long-running weekly comic strip, Bunny vs. Monkey, is still going strong in The Phoenix, and of course has been collated into hugely popular, best-selling, award-winning Bunny vs. Monkey books. I'm a huge fan of his work personally, and he is also, I have now found out, just a really lovely person to chat to, really generous with his time, talking about his work and his background, his approach to creating. I found it an absolutely fascinating conversation. We talked about Bunny vs. Monkey, about his early career, and we talk about the audiobook. There's just won Best Audiobook in the Nibbies Awards just this week. There's just so much to cover. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Here's what Jamie had to say. Hello, Jamie. Welcome to Comic Boom.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's very exciting to have you here. Dreamed of having you on the show, so it's brilliant that you are so generous with your time and have accepted, so thank you very much.
No, you're very kind. As I said, I've been listening to a lot of them, and I think you're doing amazing work, so I was honoured. I'm the excited one here.
First of all, I always like to get guests to tell us a little bit about your journey as a comics reader. When did you start becoming aware of comics as a form, and how did that love start for you?
I mean, it's hard to put an age on it, isn't it? But just as long as I can remember, when I was very, very young, my dad used to drive me to the newsagents every Sunday morning, like at the crack of dawn, when they were still offloading the newspapers off the vans to put them on the shelves. And so you'd go in and you couldn't really get round the newsagent because there were so many bundles of newspapers all over the place. And that's always stuck with me. That was such an exciting place to be, all the smells of the newsprint and the sweets and the blackjacks and the fruit salads and whatever. So I'd go there and I'd get all the comics I could get my hands on, and there were a lot back in the 80s that you could buy just off the shelves. So that was really exciting. That really instilled it in me, I think. And I had a few friends at school who were really into them as well. So we'd swap and talk about them a lot and draw our own cartoons. And so it's always been there. Back then it was like Whizzer and Chips and Buster and the Dandy and Oink and Topper. Even girls' comics like Mandy and things like that. Like, I used to just consume all of them. They were so fun, and it felt like my little world. It felt like somewhere I could inhabit away from the real world. So I've always felt very at home with comics.
What do you think it was that pulled you in? Was it storytelling? Was it the imagery? Or was it that essential combination of both, really?
There's all of that. I think what comics do really well is the spontaneity, and especially when you have a weekly comic and it has 10, 12 different characters in it, and each of them has like 2 pages or something. For a child, that works really well because you're going like, bam, here's a story, and bam, here's a different story, and here's a different, and so you're jumping from story to story, and it's just very quick bursts of just silliness, basically. And I think that's what really appealed to me. Like, every page you turned, you didn't know what sort of crazy character there'd be next. And that also has kind of fed into me. Like, I don't have the longest attention span as an adult, which is why I do very short comics as well. But often that's what you want. You just want to pick something up and put it down. And I think that's what comics do really well.
And do you think that, so you spoke a little bit as well, like, about your friends reading them, and something that I kind of observe that it seems a bit distinct for comics versus other books, which is that they do tend to get passed around or shared, or immediately a kind of community builds up around a comic, that I think sometimes happens with kind of other children's literature, but not to the same extent. it's kind of a rare event when something becomes very culturally significant to children that started as a book without it going into like being a film. But when comics in my classroom certainly would straight away be shared, passed around. That sort of idea of community, was that part of it too, do you think?
The most satisfying thing to see when kids bring their copies of Bunny vs. Monkey up for me to sign, the most satisfying thing is when it's a really battered, dog-eared copy and it's clearly been read and it's been passed around and everyone's borrowed it. And that's just so exciting because for me, one of the best things about comics as a medium, as a printed weekly medium, as it was that they felt disposable. They felt like you would stuff them in the bottom of your school bag, or, you know, you'd pass them around, or even that you'd draw on them yourselves, or you'd tear them up and make your own collages out of them. It's that disposable nature that I really, really identified with. And even as I got older into my 20s and 30s, and my friends were, you know, collecting comics, as in, you know, the more traditional Marvel or DC sort, and they were keeping them bagged and boarded and in careful boxes and sort of locked away. And even then I couldn't understand that. I thought, no, comics are an amazing medium for just tearing apart and breaking, and and I know that's sacrilege to a lot of people, but for me it's just that disposable nature is really appealing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so you're talking about getting older. What sort of things are you now reading? What are you seeing out there that really appeals to you as a reader now?
Oh, it's still children's comics. I read a few sort of more grown-up comics here and there, but mostly it's children's comics. I don't get a lot of time to read. Most of what I read is things I get sent, like advances or people wanting quotes for things, so that gives me a really good opportunity to see sort of what's coming out and what's on the way. I mean, the last amazing thing I saw was Donut Squad, Neil Cameron's Donut Squad, which is, I don't know, out in a month or two.
Yeah, I haven't seen I've only seen the strips in The Phoenix.
Yeah.
But, as a book, loves Donut Squad.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's going to be absolutely huge because it's just perfect for kids. It's that kind of pick up and put down nature. It's all these millions of different characters and all these variations, and that's why it appeals to me, because I don't have the concentration to follow a very long story arc and stick with more grown up sort of graphic novels. I prefer the immediacy of kids comics. So that's kind of what I'm reading. If I'm not reading kids comics, I'm reading like ghost stories or things like that, more grown up books. That's kind of what I prefer. But that middle ground of grown up graphic novels, I don't really read enough of them. I should do.
That's super interesting. I'm really into I really like autobiographical comics written by women. Quite serious subject matter often, quite a lot of trauma involved, but they're really beautiful. I really like that, but I also really like reading children's comics as well. And I don't just do that because of the podcast or because of my children. I really like.
Well, you need the different tones, don't you? And that's where comics really come into their own, because you can tell very serious, weighty subjects, and you can also do fart jokes and bum jokes and everything in between, and all of it is valid, and it all comes under this umbrella of comics. And I think that's kind of been neglected for quite a while, that it's a really important, vital source of, people expressing themselves.
Yeah, that breadth gets missed quite a lot in the conversations. Like if I tell people I like comics, they quite often the assumption is I'm talking about superhero comics. Yeah, which I don't really know very much about at all. Making your own comic strips as a child, is that something that you just kept doing and never stopped? Was there a time in your life where that kind of dropped off and then you picked it back up? How do we join the dots from Jamie as a child to Jamie now?
I remember always drawing pictures, like from 2, 3, 4. I've got pictures from a long time ago, and I would assume that I was always drawing pictures. And then when I found comics at an early age, that then kind of made me think, oh, well, these pictures could then go into comics. And so I think the two things, the reading and the creating, I think they just kind of mulch together and they become one. It always seemed a very natural thing to do, to try and, if you're shown an example of what you can do with something you've already been doing, that can be quite mind-blowing, especially for someone very, very young. So yeah, I've always I feel like I've always drawn comics. I was listening to one of your interviews recently where you were talking about Snoopy a lot, and I liked Snoopy, but I always preferred Garfield. Because Garfield was slightly more mainstream and a bit more obvious, perhaps. It didn't have the subtleties that Snoopy had. But I used to really, really love Garfield, and me and my friend Stephen used to trace the images of Garfield out of the book and then turn the tracing paper over and then rub on the other side.
Yeah, good technique.
Yeah, so and slowly we'd be making our own Garfield comics out of, basically copying Garfield. That made us feel like, oh, we're professional comic artists now. I mean, obviously we weren't, but that was where it started to become kind of industrial, I guess, kind of like, oh, we could churn these out. We could make loads and loads of comics. And yeah, it's a journey. As you go along, you get better and better, and you love it more and more, and soon you wouldn't know how to do anything else. So. And
what was your kind of first big break into having something published?
When I was I left school at 15 and I went to art college for 2 years and then a different art college for another 2 years. And I was fortunate with those art colleges that my tutors were big fans of comics. And so basically they said, look, if you want to, these were graphic design courses, and I'm terrible at graphic design, but it was the nearest thing I could find to doing art of some sort. And they said, look, if you want to lean into comics for this course, that's absolutely fine, because obviously that's what you want to do. And so they let me, basically my end of course final show was basically a comic strip I'd come up with and kind of all these decorations around it and things like that. And a friend's dad saw it, and it turned out he published a magazine, a cookery magazine, and he said to me, do you want to draw a comic strip every week? And I found them again recently, and they're not very readable because they're kind of hand-painted little comic strips. It was called Whistle, Whale and Flea, and they were food importers. There was like this big guy in a chef's outfit and a cat, and they were just basically sassy to each other. And yeah, they were hand-painted in gouache and ink, and they didn't print very well, but I don't know, he seemed to like them and he seemed to keep running them. But that was the first time I went into WH Smith's and found my comic in a printed magazine. And that was so exciting. So I would have been about 18 or 19, I think, when that happened.
And then how did the Bunny versus Monkey and the Phoenix start? How long after that did that happen?
Well, I've always worked a lot on my own comics and my own ideas, and not just in comics, but like greetings cards. I'd come up with a range and I'd send them out. This was in the old days before email. I'd send them out in manila envelopes to just every company I could think of. And when I'd done that, I'd then be coming up with another comic that I'd then send out to every publisher I could find. And it was just a continual cycle.
Tireless.
I'm really excited about making these things. Would you want to print them? And obviously most people say no. I mean, it's the slew of rejections, but I didn't really mind. Rejections never really bothered me, because by the time someone had rejected me, I was already working on something else anyway. So it was just carrying on all the time. So I've always been sending my work out. And so my first comics sort of gig was the Fun Day Times. I managed to do a strip called Space Roll in the Fun Day Times, which was a dream for me. And then I don't know if that led directly to working for the Dandy, but certainly somewhere alongside it, I started working for the Dandy as well. And then I heard about this comic called the DFC, which was the original version of the Phoenix, or a precursor to it. But I was under contract to a TV company at the time, where I wasn't allowed to pitch original ideas to other places, so there wasn't much I could do for the DFC. But fortunately we found a way around it, and I ended up doing a strip called Fishhead Steve for that. And then when the Phoenix came back around, I said, well, I've got this other idea that I was kind of pushing around as a book that I think would be really good, and that was Bunny vs. Monkey, and yeah, they went for it.
And it just seems to me like, before I approached you to interview, I felt quite intimidated, but it wasn't because how famous you are. It wasn't because of your success. I think it's because of the amount of work. Like, what sort of person has the brain that can just create all this stuff constantly? It's kind of like, it's amazing. So I'm really interested in how, and you've kind of just been talking, constantly having ideas. What is a day in your life like? What does your creative process look like? Because it just seems you have so much great stuff coming out all the time.
Thank you. I'll be honest, I think it's too much at the moment. I think I've kind of got myself to a point where I'm trying to do too many different projects. And my publisher's really sympathetic and helpful. It's not them at all. It's me. It's just the excitement of wanting to make things all the time. And I think I need to tail it off a bit. I think maybe over the next year or two, I need to finish a few big projects and just kind of have a few days off here and there.
Start meditating.
Yeah, exactly. But as for sort of up till now, it's just been so exciting to do. And that's all I can say about it. It's just, especially through my 20s, I remember waking up. This was back in the days of dial-up, so you could only check the internet up until, 8 or 9 a.m, and then it got really expensive. So you didn't use the internet all day. So I'd wake up really early and I'd check the internet and emails, and then that was it. And then I had a whole day working, and I'd work through till 9 or 10 in the evening, and that's not healthy. And I'm not saying anyone should do it, but it was just, I was buzzing. I was so excited to just be making things, even if I didn't have a publisher for them or anything, even before the internet, where you're getting some kind of instant gratification from people liking your work. Maybe it's partly emulating what I'd seen. So when you grow up reading comics, in your head, you think, oh, that'd be amazing to do when I'm an adult. And so you're trying to, it feels like a kind of dream come true that you're doing the thing that you loved when you were growing up. But I don't know. I'm thrilled, constantly excited to be doing this. So that's what drives me.
And was it easier, do you think, in those earlier days when you only had the internet for an hour and then were there fewer distractions then? And then also now I'm thinking with your popularity, you must have a lot of kind of press things or publisher things and other stuff going on. Is it harder to get into your kind of creative zone now? Yeah,
definitely. I feel very privileged to be where I am now, and I wouldn't knock it at all. But you get asked to do a lot of things, and they might be festivals or workshops or things like that. 99% of which I can't do. But you do also get asked a lot of other things. It's a privilege to do it, but it feels more on the admin side of things. Whereas you think, well, I wanted to be a comic artist to make comics. And if I keep jumping into the mind space of doing these press events or whatever, then that's time away from comics. And then it takes a little time for your brain to kind of sink back into comic mode and making stuff. And as a result, you can lose a few days just over a couple of hours of writing an article or something. Again, that's something I tend to sort of shy away from where possible. I try not to do these things because I don't feel like I have enough time to do all the things I want to do anyway. So I need a bit better time management on it all.
I think it's really interesting in the context of school and education as well, because quite often we're expecting children to do things like writing or creating stories in very specific chunks of time. And it's like, right, get your English books out. Write the beginning of your story, and then you're going to write the middle tomorrow and the ending on the next day. And that's actually quite a hard thing to do do that on the clock.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I can tell the difference in my comics between one that I wrote on a day when I was really in the zone and one where I just needed to get a comic done. Now, I'm hoping readers can't notice that difference, but I can very much see that
off the boil this week.
I'd never just kind of ship it out. I'd never put it out unless I was happy with it. But I can tell that, especially like the Lushkin comics. The Lushkin comics are a very different beast for me to write, and they have their own, not their own vocabulary, but they have their own kind of boundaries and physics to them that if I'm not in the right mood to write them, they just do not work. And it just looks like someone trying to be wacky for the sake of being wacky. And, let's put a catchphrase here and a fart here. And it's just, it looks very contrived, but when I'm in the zone and I can do it properly, then it just sings for me. It absolutely flies, and it's some of my best work. And I think that was the same when I was at school. There were just some days when if you were trying to write a story, it wasn't working. And the more you pound away at it, the worse it gets. And there are some days when you discover the freedom of creativity rather than scripted creativity, rather than timetabled creativity. And on those times, that's when you write your best stuff. That's when you hand in your best work, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also really interested in a little bit on the same theme, that kind of, a lot of your work seems very character based. And I think generating character ideas can be really difficult as a teacher to get children to come up with an idea. Do you have any advice on how do you come up with your characters, or are there any good ways to support children who are developing their own comics?
I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but all your best characters are parts of you. You're expressing parts of you. And this is what I always tell kids, is that every character in Bunny versus Monkey is a part of me. It's an emotion in me that I've just amplified and exaggerated. So Bunny is like a character. He's kind of the sensible anchor of it, but he just wants to be left alone. He doesn't want all this drama, and that's, very much a part of me. Whereas Monkey is this very naughty character, and that's another part of me. It's just I've ballooned it up into this kind of comedic thing, and every character in between is another part. There's a shy character, or there's a reckless character, or whatever. And when you do that, when you make them, when you pull them out of yourself, these characters, they become a lot easier to write, because you know how they're going to react. Your brain knows how it's going to react in certain situations. And so, yeah, for me, Bunny vs. Monkey has never really been that hard to write, because it's therapy for me. It's getting my emotions and thoughts down on the page anonymously through these characters, and so I get to speak to the world without saying it directly. So yeah, it's all my work is very, very personal, but it's presented in a very mainstream, colourful, easily accessible sort of way. But it all comes from the heart very much.
How do you feel when you get, presumably children show you like they've used your characters but in their own stories, when that's first started to happen? What was that like?
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, it's an honour every time you see it, and it just reminds me of when I was making my Garfield comics as a kid, and
full circle.
And then I stuck with it and then made my own characters, and it's just there's no words for it really. It's mind blowing every time.
And it's the same thing for plot lines. Do you have a bank? Do you keep a notebook to kind of grab things when they come to you, or are you keeping scribbly notes? How do you keep track of? Because when you've got, I guess, such short form stories, you need to have quite a lot of different things happening all the time. So yeah, how do you keep track of all those ideas?
It's something I don't particularly make notes or anything like that. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, because I've become very aware that I've done, well, there have been 10 Bunny vs. Monkey books, and we've got another 3 or 4 in the can already. So let's say 14 Bunny vs. Monkey books. Wow. And there is a limit. So there's a limit to how many times you can tell these stories without repeating yourself, without going back over the same things, because there are themes to all of them. There's a big monster, or let's explore this corner of the woods, and I'm very acutely aware of that, and I don't want to do that. And every time I sit down and write or draw a Bunny versus Monkey, my approach is, how can I make this fresh? How can I start again? How can I be rebooting it in this episode, and then in the next episode, how can I reboot the whole thing a little bit this time? Because the worst thing as a reader is when something gets boring, and that's even worse when you're the creator. You don't want to be making boring work. Yeah. So no, I think about that a lot, and I'm aware of it, and I'm also aware that what I do, like any writer or creator, sits inside this kind of bubble, this sphere of all your ideas, and a lot of the new ideas you come up with are just variations on the things you've done already. And I think you have to be aware of that. Like I know my parameters. I know my corner of the children's comic area. These are the things I do, the cute animals, the screaming at each other, the explosions. I know these are kind of the things I've honed in on.
And those are what the readers want to see as well when they're your book.
Yeah, and they've been really enjoying it, and so you want to keep giving them new material, and it has to be true to the material you've done already, but it also has to have some kind of spark to it. It still has to be fresh, and that is, I don't know how that's going to pan out. Maybe at some point I take a little break from Bunny vs. Monkey just to give it a bit of space and make sure I come back to it fresh. At the moment, I feel all right. At the moment, I feel like the stories are going in good places. But you have to be careful. And do you just go straight into drawing, or do you do sort of thumbnails? Yeah, I have these notebooks, these small, like, lined exercise jotter books, basically. And I very roughly thumbnail each panel through that. And when I say roughly, it's literally like a phone doodle. It's terrible. And that's enough for me to just then go straight onto final pencils or final inks or whatever, because I'm so used to doing it that way that I don't need to plot things out really, really carefully, because often when I'm doing the final art, I can be winging it. I can be changing panels here and there if they're not quite working. I see a lot of artists who put so much intense work into their roughs and their sketches and even their pencils on the page. And I don't know, that looks really professional to me. That's the only word I could think of. That looks like a professional artist working, whereas here am I, just a happy little idiot, just slamming what's funny to me onto a page and then going on to the next one. And I want to work as fast as I can, because I want to get as many ideas out as I can. So I've tried to streamline the process as much as possible and just trust myself that I can do it when it needs doing.
I feel like that kind of comes through because they feel really sort of fluid and in the moment when you're reading them. Then they don't feel like, and that's enjoyable. It's kind of got that energy. You know how sometimes when something can feel a little bit static, can't it, if it's been overworked? I
hope so. And I very much think I reach to kids who have short attention spans, because I have a short attention span. Yeah. So it has to keep me engaged for 2 pages drawing it, because I am trying to be quite quick with it. And like you say, that then comes through the page, and then when you're reading it, it's a quick read. So I think everyone involved in this transaction is quite happy with how it's worked.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about one of your other series, Max and Chaffee, because you've got so many different series, and I've put a little side note on here that I love Megalomaniacs, because I do. Oh, brilliant. It made me laugh so much. But Max and Chaffee, my youngest son has just got really into those, and he was someone that struggles with reading. And it seemed to me that it was a very different layout, and you can still tell it's your work, but it feels like a different approach. Is that something that you particularly did to make your work more accessible for younger or beginner readers? Really interested in that process.
Yeah, I wanted to do a strip that was younger than Bunny versus Monkey. I never know the ages of, where these comics are targeted. That's for the publisher and the booksellers to work out. For me, it's just what's funny and what works. But I did have in mind that there were still much younger readers than were into Bunny versus Monkey yet. And what was there for them? What sort of comic books were there for them? And there were 1 or 2 around, and that's great. But I thought, well, it would be fun for me to try something like that as well. So Max and Chaffee is very, very simple comicking. It's often just 2 panels on a page, one or 2 speech bubbles here or there. It still has a story. It still has a whole cast of characters, but it's presented in the drawings are very simple. The colours are very bright. Just little things like, I didn't want to draw borders around the panels like you would normally with a comic. There's no panel border, and the corners are kind of rounded just to kind of soften everything up. The characters in it, all the illustrations in it don't have black lines. They just have coloured lines around them, just to make it feel kind of very friendly and vibrant. And yeah, it's been an absolute buzz to work on. I'm still making them. I think we're getting up to book 5 or 6 now, and it's just a joy. Chaffee's a character that I've been working on for about 20 years now in various different ways. I've done a few picture search books before, and we made these little toys and sent them out, and there's a whole website about looking for them and animations and things like that. So it's a bigger project than just making comics. It was always meant to be kind of an ongoing multimedia sort of project. So it's really nice to actually, for all the fun stuff I did with Chaffee, I never really sat down and told stories, like personal stories about them, about characters meeting them and then what happens. And so to be able to do this, to start telling all these little adventures and stories with Chaffee's is great. I'm loving it, and it's really nice to see that kids are responding to it as well.
Yeah, I just think it's great. And it's just that simplicity of, if you're sort of just beginning reading, you've already got quite a lot of kind of cognitive stuff going on just to deal with reading, just being able to just automatically know which is the next panel and, where you're going in it just really helps, I think.
Oh, great. There are picture searches in it as well. So it's kind of interactive. The idea is you're reading along this story and you can get involved and look for certain things through the book. But there are also little sort of dotted lines kind of leading you through the adventure. And yeah, it's intended to be just a very kind way of telling a story, a very easy holding someone's hand and wandering through this sort of silly, fun story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think people think that it's kind of an innate thing to be able to understand how comics work, but it's actually not the case. It is something that we learn through exposure. And there's some really interesting, this is a total side note, but there's some really interesting research around cultures that don't have sequential images, like who tell stories in images, but in different ways. And so, for example, when they've shown comics to Aboriginal people in Australia whose storytelling is done all through one picture. So like all of the story is in the one picture, and that they interpret the comic in the same way, as in like that each picture is a completely different story and tell a story from it. It was really interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
I just thought that was an interesting side note.
Oh, that's amazing.
I'll actually put the link to the book that has that research in the show notes, people if they're interested. How can teachers that might be listening to this support children, do you think, to create comics? What can teachers do to try and support that passion if they see someone in their classroom? Did you have any support from teachers in your school? Did they enjoy looking at your comics as a child, or is that something that you wished you'd had?
I mean, it varied. Like any school, some teachers were very like, yeah, this is great, keep drawing comics, and some teachers were, can you stop drawing comics while we're doing French? I had an art teacher who I'd just got like my first commission when I was 16 or something, just an illustrative commission. And I told him, and I was really excited, my art teacher, and he said, "Oh, comics aren't proper art." And that kind of stuck with me forever. And I was like, all right, okay, I'm going to hate you for the rest of my life now.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. But those attitudes do still pervade, and I'm sure any teachers listening to this podcast don't think like that, because otherwise they wouldn't be listening.
Yeah.
But you still get parents taking their kids into bookshops and saying you can pick one book, and they'll pick up a comic book, and they go, no, pick up a proper book. And it's just, don't say proper book. They're all proper books. So I think anything I would say, most listeners probably think anyway, but I think one of the most eye-opening things was understanding that I could draw the things that I was also reading, so to take the mystique away from it. So like when I was drawing my own cartoons and comics and copying other people's work, that was a real eye-opener. In the back of Bunny vs. Monkey books, as a lot of different comics do as well, there are how to draw guides. Most comics now kind of have them in their books, and it's the point of that is to show, look, we are just using very simple shapes here. We're just using circles and squares, and then we're adding a face and a few limbs. And often that can be such a breakthrough for a kid to go, oh, the comic I was reading, I kind of assumed was just this magical thing in front of me. But now it turns out I can see the mechanics behind it. I can see how things work, and I can do my own. And that's an amazing tool, an amazing gift when you suddenly realize that. It's like if you ever learn a musical instrument and suddenly the songs you thought were somehow magically formed, you can go, oh, I get it. That's chords and that's notes, and that really changes things, and it empowers you. It gives you a freedom to create things yourself. And so I guess that's all I'd say is just understanding how easy it is to start making comics, and how valid an art form and a form of expression comics are as well. It's just, if a child seems to be naturally veering towards comics, then I would encourage the heck out of that.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes I do a little bit of copying comic panels, and just also the process of doing it, you learn loads. Like when yours doesn't quite look the same, like not like it has to look exactly the same, but when it has a different effect, and you're like, oh, how have I ended up with something that feels different? That's just super interesting.
Well, also, I think I try and tell kids this a lot. When I'm drawing my characters, and I've drawn Bunny vs. Monkey characters hundreds of thousands of times now, I still get them wrong. I still mess them up sometimes. I have to rub them out. Some characters are easier than others. So I ask kids when they come to signings, have you tried drawing any of the characters, and did you find it easy or did you find it hard? And if they say they found it hard, then I try and reassure them, look, sometimes it will always be hard to do, even when you're really, really used to it. That's just the nature of it. But more times than not, you you will come up with something you love.
I've just seen the book awards, and Bunny vs. Monkey is in like a million different categories, but one of the things that's in as well is in the audiobook category. How did the audiobook for Bunny vs. Monkey come about? Were you involved in that at all? Because people were really surprised about there being an audio version of a comic. How did that come about?
Well, as to how involved I was, I replied to a few emails. That was about it. I don't know whether that takes some of the magic out of it, but no, it was this company called Belinda who make audiobooks. And they took the reins on it, and they had this narrator called Kieran who does all the voices, and they just nailed it. They absolutely nailed it, far better than I could ever have imagined. So I think they've done the first 3 books now, and I think they're working on the next ones. I agree that I didn't understand how you would make a comic into an audiobook. There have been comic audiobooks before. I think there was an Investigators one, and I think they've done a few here and there. But it's far more than a normal audiobook, because a normal audiobook, you're reading out what's in front of you. But when you're reading out a comic, you need to insert other things. You need little narrations. You need sound effects. The Bunny vs. Monkey audiobooks have a lot of sound effects going on, because the sound effects tell parts of the story if you can't see anything, if there's nothing visual to work from. So for me, it was an amazing achievement to see what they'd done with it and to see what they'd come up with. It blows my mind. And it's a joy for me also to listen to them, because I'm listening to them when they're released at the same time that everyone else is. And so I get to hear all the jokes told in ways that I couldn't even have imagined. It's
because there's a lot of sound effects in the comic strips, and there's quite, like bombastic things happening. I feel like Bunny vs. Monkey lends itself well to audio, because you can because the things that people are doing are very noisy. Yeah, it must have cost them a lot of money on sound effects. I don't know how these things work, but it's, there's a lot of farting and explosions and screeching and, Exactly.
Amazing.
I have to say, I think, is Monkey Scottish? Someone's Scottish, and that was controversial in my house.
Yeah, it takes some getting used to. Monkey has, in the audiobooks, Monkey has this kind of Rick Mayall-ish kind of spitting voice.
Maybe that. Yeah, there was one voice that was very controversial to my children.
But the thing is, I agree, there were a couple that I had to get a little used to, but when I got used to them, they worked.
Because you're just used to hearing it in your own head, aren't you?
Yeah. Whatever voice they put to them, some of them won't be like you imagine they
were.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%. The last thing that I really wanted to talk to you about is just how your kind of role has changed, because it seems like there's been, obviously Bunny vs. Monkey has been around for quite a long time, but then also there's been an incredible sort of surge in popularity over the last few years. How has that been as an experience for you, first of all? And then have you found that your role has changed, being a bit more of a spokesperson for comics more generally with that popularity?
Yeah, it's been an absolute joy to see this resurgence. I think over the last 3 or 4 years, it's really kind of taken off, and publishers are now putting out a lot of comic books. And it's something that those of us in comics, whether comic artists or the few publishers who've really stuck with comics, we've always known and we've believed that children love comics. They have to see them. And from I bang on about this a lot, but through the 90s and the early 2000s, kind of publishers just forgot about comics. This amazing heritage we had in this country of weekly comics and comic books, they abandoned because it was just getting too expensive, I guess, to commission new material. So comics turned into sort of magazines instead, where they were just using assets and photos and stuff. So original comic content wasn't really being commissioned, apart from the Beano and the Dandy, and then when the Phoenix came through as well, and then 1 or 2 other titles. But it's been such a slow climb through those decades. And it's required the absolute dedication of those publishers to stick with it and to know that comics are a really vital way of telling stories. So to see that now suddenly exploding and all publishers going, hey, we need to be putting comics out too, is amazing. And part of the reason it's amazing is because all these comic artists are now getting chances to tell their stories. And these comic artists, most of them have been around for the last few decades in, the wilderness years where there haven't been many outlets to be telling stories. Now suddenly publishers want to hear them and they want to commission them. And so just on a personal note, a lot of them are friends. So it's really nice to see that they're finally getting to tell their stories, and they're great. They're amazing artists, and they draw amazing comics, and they deserve, all the royalties in the world. So yeah, the whole wave that's going on at the moment is wonderful. I think it should only be the start. I think it could get far bigger than this. I think comics should really be respected again in British culture a lot more than they have been recently.
Yeah, part of the mission of this podcast is to do that. Promote that.
And the more kids we can reach with them, and the more kids we can say, hey, this is a way to express yourself as well. This is a home for you if you want it in comics. Yeah, it's wonderful, and this is how it should always have been going. As for my role, yes, it doesn't sit easy with me. If I'm honest, I don't feel like a spokesman for comics at all. I don't know enough about anything to talk about anything. I can tell you what I feel passionate about, but I couldn't give you facts and figures about the comic industry or anything like that. I can just tell you what matters to me, and it matters to me that comics get recognised and that kids enjoy reading. So when people ask me for quotes about what do you think of the state of the comic industry, I think there was a piece in the Observer yesterday where they asked me for a few quotes, and I said, this and this and this, but I feel like there are probably people better than me who can wax more lyrical than I can, or can, say, well, reading is up 40% of comics, but I can't even remember the stats. Yeah, there are, people like the Comics Laureate and Hannah Berry and, all these people who know the intrinsic value of comics a lot more than I do. Essentially, I just want to sit at home and draw silly animals. and that's, for the most part, that's what I get to do. But sometimes other stuff comes into it, and I need to put my grown-up pants on. So
it must be a strange kind of push and pull between those things all the time. And what's next? You've already said that there's 3 more Bunny versus Monkey books already done. Mind blown. I got the latest one, I think it was at David Fickling's anniversary, and it was a few weeks before it came out, and my son's minds were blown. I got serious mum kudos for that. They were like, we've got an illegal book, parading it around the playground, but they were very excited to have an illegal
contraband.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, what is coming up next for you?
What is coming up? At the moment, I'm very knee deep in my series Flember. So I did a series of illustrated novels called Flember, and I did 4 books of it, and the 5th and final book I was supposed to do about a year ago. It's taken me 2 or 3 years to get it done, just partly to find the time, but partly to do it properly and tell a story I was happy with. But it's finally written and signed off. It's just the next couple of months I need to do all the illustrations for it. So that's coming out at the end of this year. And when that's done, that'll be 10 years of my life, a project that's taken 10 years of my life kind of finished. And I feel like I'm going to have more time after that, hopefully, that I'm going to have a bit more freedom. But I'm really, really proud of what it is, and I'm really chuffed with it all. But yeah, as a sort of day-to-day thing, Bunny vs. Monkey I do a strip a week still in The Phoenix. I'm doing a new comic strip in The Phoenix, which starts in a couple of months, which I don't know. I don't think I'm allowed to say the name of it yet. But, and then that ties into something else, which again, I'm not allowed to talk about. It's really frustrating. I have a couple of things coming up that are really big things for me, but they haven't been properly announced yet. So I should probably keep them. More Max and Chaffee books. I want to get back to drawing more Lushkin as well. I have a TV show finally on Nickelodeon this year.
I was going to ask about TV.
Oh, but I've been trying for 20 years. I've really, even before I was particularly known in comics, I was working in TV and I was trying to get all these different ideas off the ground. And it has been, working in TV is one of the most difficult and thankless places to come up with original ideas. I haven't enjoyed it at all. Well, no, that's not fair. Actually, I have enjoyed it, but I discovered that I belong in comics and that I should be making comics. And as soon as I did that, as soon as I realised, I should be spending all my time on comics instead, then TV started coming to me a bit more, because it would say, you've made this comic and let's try and make it a TV show, rather than me going to TV with original ideas and then watching them get torn apart. So it's worked a lot better for me that way. But yeah, so I have a show called Super Duper Bunny League on Nickelodeon Junior. I think it starts over here not till the autumn. So that's for me on a personal note. That's a bucket list thing. That's finally after 20 years, something finally took off.
I think Bunny versus Monkey film would be cool.
Oh, it'd be amazing. Yeah.
Let's just start getting that sorted out.
I mean, a lot of these things are kind of rumbling on along through option and developments in the background.
It's a long road.
But there's never enough to really talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bunny vs. Monkey to me seems like a no-brainer that it would work so well as an animated
Well, Dogman's
cartoon.
got a film now. I actually saw on the front of the Bunny vs. Monkey where it says like perfect for fans of Dogman, and that also made me think like, and that's the first Bunny vs. Monkey book, like that. That was all there was at a point where, not all there was, but that was like the predominant title, Dogman, for children who wanted to like have a book that had comics in it. And now there's so much variety. It's just
Dogman was the real breakthrough, and it showed the format you could give kids comics in, like, kind of this chunky small book, and it also showed a lot of publishers. Kids do love comics, predominantly in America, but then as it started coming over here as well, I think everyone started noticing. So yeah, Dogman opened the doors for a lot of us, I think, definitely.
And now the film, I liked the film. I thought it was good.
I've heard it's good. I haven't seen it yet. But I've heard
they do some cool things where there's like, the sound effect words like come on the screen, but then the characters kind of like interact with them and like push them away and stuff. It's cool. I like that. I enjoyed that part of it. Yeah, it's cool. We're coming to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. What can teachers do to harness this buzz that there is around the form at the moment in the classroom, do you think?
A lot of the schools I have spoken to, their libraries are weirdly short of comics. They don't have many comics in it. And I understand funding for libraries, especially school libraries, is difficult. But yeah, comics in it's just that, it's that point of accessibility. It's kids knowing that comics exist in the first place. That's always been the struggle. Getting them to read comics has never been that difficult. It's just showing them to them. So anything we can do to get them in the libraries. I always think things like worksheets and even just colouring in sheets and things are amazing, but I'm as guilty as anyone of not putting many of them online. I think it would really help artists and publishers to have printable material that libraries could be, showing kids, allowing them to interact with. But again, I need to do that. So that's another thing on my list. And I don't know, just an understanding of how valuable comics are. But I think we all know that now. I think as a society, we're starting to really pick up on that. And I would love as many kids reading comics as possible.
Yeah, me too. We should continue on. You're slightly more productive in the mission than I am by actually making loads of best-selling comics. But I'll cheer you on from the sidelines.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it.
So the final question is, if we were to add, a lot of people struggle with this, if we were to add one comic or book about comics to our to-be-read piles tomorrow, what would you recommend we read? Something that you've seen, that you like, that you think, add that to your list.
I know. So I wonder what people normally say. Do they normally say books about how to make comics, or do they say books that are comics?
Mostly comics that they've read. Some books about comics.
And I imagine Calvin and Hobbes comes up quite a lot.
Calvin and Hobbes isn't often recommended at the end. A lot of people talk about Calvin and Hobbes when they're talking about their kind of like early reading, getting into comics bits. I don't think it's been one that's recommended at the end.
Okay, so I'm not going to say Calvin and Hobbes, even though I adore Calvin and Hobbes.
It's amazing.
I'm looking at my bookshelf and I'm going to say The Prehistory of the Far Side. So The Far Side, for anyone who doesn't know, was a single panel comic strip in newspapers. It was huge in like the 80s and 90s. Just a single panel, just a very basic gag. So it wasn't sequential. It wasn't one panel after the other. And they were just very easy jokes, and most people would probably recognise them if they saw them. Like I say, the Far Side was massive, and there are an awful lot of imitators of it. But this one book, The Prehistory of the Far Side, is about the artist Gary Larson talking through his process, and he posts up, for example, he'll post up the finish panel, but he'll also post up the sketch, or he'll post up how the panels got their jokes mixed up when they were printed, or it's just a lot of behind the scenes stuff of how it all works. And that, for me as a kid, really, 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 really changed things. And I was talking to someone about it the other day. I can't remember who, but they weren't a comic artist, but they too said that was an amazing book, because you suddenly realised the workings of a comic, the workings of being
that
funny,
demystification,
of drawing a cartoon.
Yeah.
To have a grown up sit down with you and say, look, this is what went wrong here. This is what I was thinking here. It really opens your eyes to how all this stuff works. So yeah, even though it's single panel comics, they're comics, aren't they? I never quite know. Like gag cartoons.
Yeah, that cartoon is what I was going to say, but yeah, I think they're part of comics, aren't they?
I'm gonna make it comics for the purpose of this answer.
Yes.
Yeah. So the prehistory of the Far
I don't
Side.
think we'll ban you from saying it on the,
Thank you.
on the basis that it's only
I think it counts. I think if you saw it, you would go, "Oh no, that does fit in comics."
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've not heard of that one, and I love all that kind of nitty gritty behind the scenes stuff. So yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for that recommendation, and thank you for joining me today and sharing all of your knowledge. It's been great to have you on.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's been an absolute honour. It's always lovely. Like I said, the responsibility of being spokesperson for comics doesn't sit with me, but I am always very, very happy to wang on about comics for an hour.
Talk about the thing that you love. Well, thank you for wanging on Comic Boom.
Thank you for having me.
There you have it, a great chat with Jamie. I'm so grateful to him for giving us time, and I think there was loads of really interesting insights. I think you get a real glimpse of the man behind the comic strips, and he's got such a calm and genuine energy. I really loved talking to him, and a great recommendation there as well. My recommendation this week is going to be something that I've recently read, Anzu in the Realm of Darkness by Mai K. Nguyen. I hope I've pronounced that right. I'm really sorry if I haven't. An absolutely stunning, beautiful book. The colours, the use of the comic form, the characters, the artwork. I love reading about Japanese mythology, and this is all set within that Japanese and mythological underworld. A coming of age, a reckoning with your identity, a story about a young girl who falls into the underworld. Also themes of intergenerational relationships, connecting with our heritage whilst also sort of moving forward and being ourselves. It's a really, really beautiful book, absolutely stunning. I very much enjoyed it, so that's my recommendation for this week. Thanks to ALCS for sponsoring today's episode. As you know, we often have writers on Comic Boom speaking about their work, and ALCS is a not-for-profit organisation supporting its 120,000 plus members to collect money for all of the secondary uses of their work, things like photocopies, digital reproductions, and use in education as well. And they also provide some fantastic resources to support educators to explore topics like copyright and plagiarism in the classroom. I noticed on their website that they've got a really up-to-date selection of resources on AI, poetry and copyright, which is really interesting. So that was around the National Poetry Day. So they teamed up with National Poetry Day to bring you 2 videos and some accompanying resources about AI and poetry, really starting to tackle those important conversations around the role that humans play in creating art and poetry and why that's important in the age of AI. So really interesting stuff there. And that's for ages 9 to 14. So a really good span and different things you can dip in and out of. Check that out. The link to their website will be in the show notes. What a brilliant 50th episode. In fact, I have a bit of a confession to make because I realised after carefully planning Jamie's episode to be the 50th episode of Comic Boom that this is actually the 49th, but we're just going to ignore that. We're going to keep calm. We're going to carry on. Hashtag not the 50th episode, but it's the 50th episode in spirit. And next week we also have a brilliant episode as well. So there's no concerns there. But thank you so much for tuning in and listening. You, as always, please share with your networks. We are now set up on Blue Sky, so you can find the podcast on Instagram, on Blue Sky, and on X, and on LinkedIn. If you want to find me, I also share the episodes on LinkedIn there as well. So have a look out for those. You can share them to your networks easily, get that link going, and we'll spread the word about the importance of comics and its uses in education between us. Love being part of this community of educators, librarians, academics, creators, all passionate about the same thing, which is the power of the form. So thank you. It's been great. I've loved making these last 50 episodes at 49 and very much looking forward to bringing you next week's episode too. You've been listening to Comic Boom, which is produced and hosted by me, Lucy Starbuck Bradley. Thanks for listening.